let's go back and look at the Gemara, and then we'll see how deeply we get into some of the things that I was looking into. I'll just tell you now, one of the things that I've been very interested in is this word ayef, right? Which the Gemara offers different possible perushim for. And I just find that really interesting that there would be such varied perushim for the word ayef. So we usually translate the word ayef as tired or weary. And of course, there are, we have texts that seem to indicate that, but there are also other texts, which the Gemara is referring to some of them, that may indicate other things besides just tiredness. Weariness is a broader term, and anyway, all translations are imperfect. So we'll look a little bit at that as we go back over this. So we're going to pick up again, look a little more closely now. We spent a long time looking at passages in Lachim and in Shmuel and all of that, just because I think that was worthwhile, even though it wasn't immediately necessary. Just a second. I'm going to mute you because there's also a little bit of some kind of a little noise. Oh, okay, you muted yourself. But feel free to speak up if you have something to say. Okay, so we're here in the Gemara. We're at the Ibayet Ema. We read through this, but we're going to look at it a little more closely this week. The Ibayit Ema, if you want, I will say. So the Gemara is still trying to prove that rechitza, that is the lack of washing, right? Not washing is called an inui, is considered to be an affliction. Rechitza de ikre inui menala. So where do we learn that from? Mehacha. We learn it from here. Dichtiv le'aviatar kohen amar hamelech anatot lech al sadecha ki ishma v'ata v'yom hazeh lo amitcha ki nasat et aron Hashem Elokim lifnei David avi v'chi hitanit b'chol asher hitaneh avi. So Rashi just fills in a little bit for us. Le'aviatar kohen v'chulei. So that is, you carried the Aron of Hashem when David was running away from Avshalom, and you hitanita, you afflicted yourself, or you suffered in all that my father was afflicted. So this is where we get the word inui. Uchtiv David ki amru ha'am ra'eh v'ayef etzameh b'midbar. We'll look again at that pasuk in a moment. Right, and Rashi says, "Hitanita b'chol asher hitaneh avi." Lamanu shenikret brichato shel David mibnei Avshalom inui. So we learn from that pasuk, where Shlomo is addressing Aviatar, that David's flight from Avshalom was called an inui, uchtiv, and it says regarding that flight, ki amru ha'am ra'eh v'ayef etzameh b'midbar, because the people said that they were hungry and ayef and thirsty in the wilderness. So, just to remind us of that pasuk, just a sec. I have a lot of windows open here. Oops. Okay. So at this point in the story, Avshalom has the upper hand. It says, "Vayikabo David Machanaima." When David came to Machanaim, Vishovi ben Nachash merabat ben Ne'amon u'Machir ben Amiel mi-lo davar u'Barzilai hagiladi meroglim. So these people, Shovi ben Nachash. Oh, hang on a second. Michael Werner is joining us. Hi, Michael Werner.
Howdy.
Okay, so we're in the middle of something. Just a second. משכב וספות וכלי יוצר וחיטים וסוהרים וקמח וקלי ופול ועדשים וקלי. So a place to lie down and sapot, basins, earthen vessels, wheat and barley and flour and parched grains and pol and adashim v'kali, right? So these people that were listed in the previous pasuk brought all of these supplies. Udvash v'chena b'tzon ushvot bakar higishu v'david v'la'am asher ito le'achol. Right, so they brought all of these things, including honey and butter and sheep and cheese of cattle. They brought to David and to the people with him to eat. Ki amru ha'am, because the people, in other words, the people who were with David in their flight from Avshalom, said, Ra'ef v'ayef v'tzameh b'midbar, that they are hungry, they are ayef, and they are thirsty in the wilderness, right? So these people brought supplies to David and the people who were with him, is people who were supporting him. So we know from earlier in the story that Evyatar is one of those people. So now the question is, what does ayef mean? That is, Ra'ev and Sameh are clear. I know that Ra'ev means they're hungry for food. Sameh means they're thirsty for drink. And Ayef is not so clear. We don't really know what that means. Now, can anybody think of other places in Torah that mention the word Ayef? Anything come to mind?
Isn't Esau comes into the field?
Okay, so now, unfortunately, I'm still really having a hard time understanding it. Say that again.
Sorry, Esau comes into the field. It's described as like a.
So it's when Esau, he says, when Esau came back from the field, and and saw
Very good.
Yaakov preparing his adashim.
Okay, excellent. That's actually the first place in the Torah that mentions the word ayef. It's also mentioned in the story.
Actually, in the context of Shaul, when he said that they should be fasting. And then Yonatan eats some honey, and his eye. I mean, I believe it shows up in that context.
You know what? Honestly, offhand, I don't know, but I think you may be right. I'm going to just take a look, though, at this first one. It's also brought up in the context of the attack with Amalek, where the people are described as being Ayef Yagea. So here, by the way, speaking of Ayef in the more common sense, I'm kind of exhausted, so if I'm slow, just bear with me. I slept well, but not enough, so I decided I would push through and take my nap after we finish. So let's just remind ourselves of this story, and we'll see some of the comments. So, right, Vayigdalu Hanarim. Speaking of Esav and Yaakov, so the young men grew up, and Esav was Ish Yodei Tzayir, Ish Sadeh. He was a man who knew hunting, and he was a man of the field. Yaakov Ishtam, Yoshev Halim. Vayahav Yitzhak et Esav ki tzayid befiv, v'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov. So we're all familiar with these basic psukim, I'm sure. And then we have this story, Vayazed Yaakov Nazid, Vayavo Esav min hasadeh, v'hu ayef. So Yaakov made a nazid. Which is usually, how do they translate that? Yaakov cooked a stew. So I think Shadal says, by the way, that there's a relationship between the word zadon and mezid and nazid, that they're all based on a concept of boiling. That when you do something b'mezid, you're doing it out of a kind of an emotional heat, and you can also use that same root to cook something. Anyway, Yaakov made some kind of a nazid, and Esav comes from the field, and he is ayef. So I'll just tell you here the Targum translates ayef, mishalhe, which is a word that I'm guessing you may not be familiar with, but it's the word that he always uses for ayef. And it does seem to mean weary. It seems to refer to weariness. But let's look at Rashi. Rashi here says, Rashi says, Vayazed is Lashon Bishul. Right? Yeah, the verb form is a language of cooking, but our concern is V'hu Ayef. V'hu Ayef, Rashi says, B'ritzicha. He is Ayef with murdering. Kamada Tamar ki Ayfan Nafshi Lahorgim. Ayfan Nafshi Lahorgim. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Pikol kechola Shamati tzara kamav kira, a sound or a voice like a sick woman. I heard tzara kamav kira in distress, like a woman giving birth for the first time. Kol bat Tzion tityapeach tifares kapeha. Oy nali ki aifa nafshi lohorgim. Woe is me, because my nefesh is aifa for before murderers. My soul, they translate, my soul faints before the murderers. But what you see, without digging too deep in this pasuk and its context, there's a relationship between ayef and killing. So Rashi says he's ayef b'ritzicha, which is quite interesting. The Gur Aryeh here explains, the Gur Aryeh is the Maharal's Perush on Rashi's Perush on the Torah. It says b'ritzicha. He says, even though we see the term ayef referring to hunger, like be'eretz ayefa, which is a pasuk in Yeshayahu, which there it would mean like a land of hunger, a land that's in need of food. We could also explain it as referring to murder. It says the reason that we would associate ayef with something other than weariness per se, or including, let's say, why we don't associate it with hunger. In other words, if we say it's hunger, that makes sense, because what happens? Esav comes, and if you understand ayef means that he's hungry, then it follows what he says in the next pasuk. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov, haliteni na min ha'adom hazeh ki ayef anochi. Alken kara shmo Edom. Right? So he says, Yaakov, like, stuff me with this red thing, because I am ayef. So if ayef means ra'ev, it makes perfect sense. So why does Rashi say, or what's the basis for any other perush other than hunger? So the Gur Aryeh says, Dahave michtav vayavo Esav ayef min hasadeh. If it meant hunger, the pasuk should have been worded differently. The syntax should have been different. It should have been Esav came ayef from the field. Shma mina hadakamar b'hu ayef. In other words, hu ayef is tacked on. It's not descriptive of the state of Esav say as he's coming in from the field. It's a description of him at having come from the field. Shma mina hadakamar b'hu ayef lovely inyan rav. So that indicates to me that ayef is not referring to hunger. Shekol adam kishaba min hasadeh hura'ev, because anyone coming from the field is hungry. That is, it would have been enough for the pasuk just to say that Esav came from the field and left it at that, and then the next pasuk would also have made sense, that he's hungry, he wants to eat. Elahad dahach ayef lo talya b'sadeh klal. This ayef in the pasuk that we just read about Mazid is not dependent on the field at all. For whom miltaban nafshe, it's a thing unto itself. And so that leaves room for this understanding that he's ayef v'ritzicha. He's weary of, meaning that he had been weary in the wake of murdering. Anyway, that takes us in another direction, which is also quite interesting. But one of the reasons I mention it is because the word ayef seems to be vague enough that it carries different meanings and different connotations. So sometimes it's associated with some kind of a tiredness, a general weariness. Sometimes it's associated with hunger, or it could be associated with, even with ritzicha. So it's a funny kind of word. There's a long entry in the Radak's dictionary in his Sefer Shoashim, and the word is related the way he and a lot of Rishonim understood. It's also related to the word oath, like flight, which we could discuss. Anyway, maybe I'm too tired my mind is wandering a little bit. But I spent some time looking into it. I don't have an entirely cohesive understanding, and I'm still looking for other people who explain it. This is this pasuk that the Qur'an referred to, the Hayat Ish Kamachadeh Ruach V'Seiter Zarem Kefalge Mayim B'Tzayon Ketzel Sela Kaved Be'eretz Ayefa. And a man shall be like a refuge from the wind and a shelter from the tempest, like water courses in a dry place, like the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. There arguably could we be referring to hunger, like what's a weary land? It could be that a weary land is a land that no longer produces food, right? That it's weary from growing. It can no longer
Desolate.
Yeah, so it's desolate. Very good. Okay. So the Gemara says, back to right. So this is the drasha that we explained. So Shlomo says to Eviatar that you hitanita, right? That you afflicted yourself, or were the subject of affliction, along with my father. And we understand what that affliction is from the story as it's told earlier in Shmuel Bet, because that when David was running away, that these people brought him supplies because the people said that they were hungry, they were ayef, and they were thirsty in the wilderness. So Ra'ev milechem, right? They're hungry for bread or food generally. Tzameh mimayim, they were thirsty for water. Ayef mimai, so what were they ayef from? Lav me'rechitza, were they? Wouldn't it make sense then that they were ayef from not having washed? Now, why is that a logical conclusion? Why would I think then that the ayef means rechitza?
Was it the list of supplies that are brought? Vessels, supplies from Russia.
Okay. Michael Werner, do you hear Michael Schwartz? Can you tell me what he said? You're muted.
I mean, if I understand correctly, Basically, supplies were short. There's nothing to wash with. They're in the desert. But I don't think that's what Michael was saying. I think he's saying something more specific. He wasn't talking about context. He's talking about something more specific.
So you're also having a hard time understanding him.
Try again. Oh, nope, just lost him altogether.
Yeah, maybe he's going to try to reconnect. So let's wait a moment. I see you're back in your apartment.
Yes.
Any new house sitting on the horizon?
In June, I'm going to be back up in Arnona. For about, I think, about a week and a half, 2 weeks. Still trying to figure out how to get back to America and figure out even if I want to go back to America. It's complicated.
I'm sure.
I mean, on lots of grounds, not just financially. It's very, very, yeah.
Okay, Michael Schwartz, speak to us.
How's this, better?
Oh,
That
wow,
is
yes,
better.
very nice.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Okay.
Okay, so why would Ayef refer to Rechitza?
Because in the list of supplies, we talk about they bring food, they bring water, and then they also bring kalim, vessels, implying it's for washing.
Excellent, excellent. Right, so that's a really good observation. So, in other words, so we know that. So first of all, we will immediately knock out the idea that Ayef means hunger or thirst, because those are mentioned explicitly, right? And so what else could they be Ayef from? And so like you say, so based on the supplies, you could argue that they were Ayef from washing. Now,
although
yeah, go ahead.
you could say that, I mean, if you're having adashim and grains, you need what to cook with and what to eat from. So it could be that kalim simply refers to cookware.
Well, actually, I was going to say something else, but hold on a second. Let's take a moment and look back at that pasuk. Here we go. Let's go back and look at the pasuk. So, what were the supplies? Mishkal v'sapot uchli yotzer, v'chitim u'sorim v'kamach v'kali. So, what's interesting is I might have said that Ayef means they were tired from sleep, like they were physically tired, because the first thing they brought were beds, but the second thing are these sapot uchli yotzer, basins and earthen vessels. So the kli yotzer, I would say, is like what Michael Werner is saying. Those seem to be things that one would use perhaps for cooking, or if any, those could just be water vessels, right? Just for carrying the water. The basins, though, seem to be referring to things that one might use for washing. I'm not an expert in these kalim, so I don't know for sure. But I think your observation is good. So as we're saying, once I remove the possibility that Ayef cannot mean hunger or thirst, then it's going to limit what Ayef can mean. So why not say that it's Rechitza? The other thing I'll mention in this regard is, so we learn from other places in Tanakh, let's say, probably the first one that comes to mind, we learn this idea that when people come from traveling, that the first thing they're going to do is wash, right? Like, so we have the three the three malachim who appear as men to Abraham, and the first thing he says to them is, come by and wash your legs. It's the first thing, even before they eat. So it's considered to be very, very basic for somebody who would have been traveling. And I also think, I've in my mind, I've also related that idea to the Kohanim, and that they had to wash their hands and legs before they served in the temple. So the idea of washing we take washing nowadays for granted in ways that people not that long ago in history did not. It's very common for us to take a shower every day. And of course, before you had indoor plumbing, that wasn't something that people did. And people would go, there's, the joke about people who had a bath on Saturday night, whether they needed it or not. But we know that, at least in the Western world, people bathed rarely. It was really not that common. And one of the reasons that middle class and wealthier people had, especially women, had a variety of perfumes, was to cover a body odor.
It's
Anyway.
also said that part of why Jews did better during the Black Death is that we immerse ourselves regularly, which got rid of the fleas.
Yeah, I've heard that theory. I don't know if that stands up to scrutiny, but I've heard that theory also. Right. In other words, Jews, look, men didn't necessarily immerse themselves regularly, but people did wash before they ate regularly. And probably, as a rule, people would have washed every Erev Shabbos. Anyway, this idea of washing as like a basic human need is something that I think we see in these places in Tanakh. This idea that you wash yourself off when you're traveling. I'm digressing on this a little bit, maybe too much, but it's also partly because my mind is working slowly. So again, bear with me. Nonetheless, the point is, so ayef mimai lav merechitza, wouldn't we say that they were ayef, the people who with David, they were ayef from not having washed? And if that's true, that they were ayef from not having washed, so what does that prove?
It proves that rechitza is part of a niyyah.
Is part of
Affliction.
Affliction, right? Very good. The Dilma minilata sandal. Maybe they were ayef from having gone without shoes. In other words, the idea, again, being that ayef might be, now this is a little harder to understand, but the point is that, again, ayef is a vague enough term, or not defined enough term. I could refer it to something else, some other bodily need. So I'm not going to refer to, it's not going to refer in this context to eating or drinking, because those got excluded. But these people who have been walking in the midbar for a long time and under duress, maybe the ayefut is a result of not having had proper footwear. I haven't found anyone yet who discusses this explicitly. Why would we think rechitza? I think we gave good reasons about why we would think rechitza. I didn't see explicitly anybody who gave a good understanding of why we might think of milat sandal, except that the context is that they have been wandering for a long time, and that we know that, if they're wandering for a long time in the desert, not wandering, but exactly, but like, being in the desert for a long period of time on the move could have easily worn down whatever footwear there has. And it's just in that context. But it also seems that we bring it in here as a possibility because we know that Nilata Sandal is another Inui of Yoma Kippurim. Ema Marabi Yitzhak Mehacha. So he says, so I can't prove it from this pasuk in Shmuel. Because maybe it's Rechitza, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's Nilata Sandal. That is, another way I think of understanding the Gemara is that when the Gemara says maybe it's Rechitza, or why not say that it's Nilata Sandal, it just means that they were Ayef in a kind of general way that could have included these things. But what we want is something that is more explicit. We want a more explicit relationship between Inui and Rechitza. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, I learned it from this pasuk in Mishlei, Mayim Karim al Nefesh Ayefa. Let's just take a look at that pasuk, which is here. So excuse me. Here in this parak of Mishlei, it's bringing different, different Mishlei, right? These different aphorisms. Let's just look a little bit earlier. Ruach tzafon techalel gashem, ufanim nizamin lashon sater. That a northern wind brings forth rain, or will start up the rain. Ufanim nizamin lashon sater, and lashon sater they translate as a backbiting tongue. In other words, like hidden, it's literally hidden speech brings about an angry face, right? So the metaphor is the northern wind that brings which is like the angry face, or is like the lashon sater, which is the part that you don't see that brings the part that you do see. Tov shevet al pinat gag me'eshet midyanim uveit chaver. It's better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than to share a house with a contentious woman. Right? So another metaphor. And then we come to ours. Mayim karim al nefesh ayefa ushmua tova me'eretz merchak. So here the translation takes a little bit of liberty in order to make this into a sentence. That like cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. So what do we see here about Ayefa, Nefesh Ayefa? What would we think that Nefesh Ayefa is from this pasuk?
Thirsty.
You would think, stop, it's thirsty, that cold water is going to be regenerative, right, rejuvenating to a thirsty person in the same way that good news that comes from afar would lift one's spirits. So what does the Gemara say? So that seems to be a good proof. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, Mehacha, so we'll learn it from here. Maim karim on nefesh ayefa, that cold water on the ayef soul is going to be something good. B'dilma mishtiya, right? So he wants to prove from here that Mayim Karim on Nefesh Hayefa tells me that the Nefesh Hayefa is going to be washed by the Mayim Karim. But the Gemara pushes back with what we might think is the simpler understanding. The Dilma Mishtiya, maybe the pasuk about Mayim Karim is really talking about drinking. That cold water is going to be good for the Nefesh Hayefa because the Nefesh Hayefa is thirsty. What makes you think that it's cold water that's going to be used for washing? So the Gemara pushes back and says, Miktiv ba Nefesh Hayefa. Does the pasuk say on ba Nefesh in the thirsty soul or in the Ayef soul? If it said ba nefesh hayefa, then I would understand that the water was going inside the person. Al nefesh hayefa ktiv, but rather it says cold water on a nefesh hayefa is what's good. So it must be that it's cold water that's going on the person. So this is the final proof, and this is where we get the idea. This is at least our relationship in terms of defining terms between ayef, between inui and rechitza. So we start with the hitanita of Evyatar because you were mitaneh, and we understand that the inui included being ayef. And now from this pasuk in Mishlei, I'll prove that being ayef refers to washing. That's the Shalshevet HaKabbalah, right? That's the chain of tradition that brings us to this point. Uh-oh. Michael Werner is back. Michael Schwartz got up. Michael, I cannot hear you.
I lost my internet connection.
Well, I'm glad you found it.
Actually, I didn't find it. I'm using hotspot off my phone.
Oh, okay. Well, you found yeah, that's fine. Okay. Since I'm fading, I want to try to do the next part, at least start the next part, and then I think I'm going to have to sign off.
You're IF.
I'm IF in the more conventional sense. I went to the mikveh before, so I did wash. Okay, so
But was it Maim Karim?
no, fortunately it was Maim Chamim. Look, on a hot day, it's nice to go into a cold mikveh. On a cold day, I'm not such a big fan, but that's a different discussion. So the Gemara is still trying to find the textual basis for relating the other Inuyim to the word Inui. So now we're up to Nilata Sandal. Nilata Sandal Minala. So where do we learn that Nilata Sandal, that not wearing shoes on Yom Kippur, would be considered an Inui? Dichtiv v'David ole b'ma'aleh hazetim ole uvoche v'rosh lo chafui uhu holech yachef. So we'll look at that pasuk in a moment, but we see that David goes up to the Ma'aleh hazetim. He's going up and he's crying. His head is chafui, is like exposed or undone. And he goes yachef. He's going yachef. Yachef mimai. So what is he yachef from? Lav minilata sandal. So in other words, the initial assumption is that the word yachef means shoeless. Isn't that what it means? That he went barefoot. Yachef means barefoot. Lav minilata sandal. So the word says, no, Dilma misusya umeratka, or years of the Bach metarka. So maybe it just means that he had to go without a horse and a whip for the horse. Ratka Rashi says is shotasus, right? It's another word for not for whip. What do you call a stick that people would use to hit a horse? There's another word and I can't think of it. Michael Warren, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, but I can't remember the word either.
As soon as I mentioned it, then it probably went out of your head, because usually you can add it in. But all right. Okay. Anyway, maybe it just means that not that David was going barefoot. Maybe it just means that he was without a horse, and that Yachef means without a horse. Ela marav Nachman bar Yitzchak mehacha. So rather, I'm going to learn that there will be a connection. You know what? Before we go on, so let's understand this. What's the proof here? We're trying to prove that Nilata Sandal, that not wearing shoes, is a kind of Inui. So how do I see it from this pasuk? So let's take a look at this pasuk a little bit more in context, as we are wont to do.
This is when David is in mourning for Absalom, no?
Yeah, I think so. Hold on. Eric Betts. Sorry, 1 second. I really apologize. It's not when he's in mourning. Okay. Let's read this a little bit. So this is after the story of Amnon and Tamar, and after Avshalom, right? So Avshalom had killed him, and Yoav pleads to have Avshalom restored um, to the court. And it was after this, Vayaso Avshalom Merkavav V'Sasim L'Chamishim Ish Batzim L'Fanav. So it's after this that Avshalom sets him in a way that we see later on with Adoniah. Avshalom already starts to set himself up in a kind of a grand way with a chariot and with horses and with 50 men running in front of him, right? So he makes himself very regal and very grand. Yishkim Avshalom v'yamad al yad derech hasha'ar, v'hi kol ha'ish asher yeh lo riv lavo el hamelech l'mishpat, like Rav Avshalom elav, v'yomer emi zeh irata, v'yomer me'achad shivtei Yisrael abdecha. So Avshalom sets himself up next to the gate of the city, which we know from many other places. That's where people would come to get judgments, to settle disputes. There would be a judge there. And Avshalom sets himself up. He essentially insinuates himself into this position of being a judge. So as soon as I see that your words are good and right, or compelling maybe, and you don't have, in other words, the king isn't listening to you. ויאמר אבשלומי ישימני שופט בארץ, ועלי יבוא כל איש אשר יאמרי במשפט והצדקתי. So Avshalom says publicly, he says, oh, if only they would make me, who will place me, right, as being a judge for the land, that everybody can come to me with their problems. So if a person would come to approach him and bow down to him, then he would reach out his hand and he would kiss him. So this is how Avshalom was with everybody who came, and he's now, right, he's strategically placed himself at the Shar Ha'ir, and he is, as I said, like insinuated himself into this position of being like a judge in place of the king, right? Because he's saying, oh, like the king isn't listening to you, but I'll listen to you. Vayhimi ketza ba'im shana, vayomer Avshalom el hamelech echana v'ashalem et nidriya shenadarti l'Hashem b'Chevron. So this was at the end of 40 years. 40 years of what? Difference of opinion there, but Avshalom says to his father, I'm going to go now and I'm going to pay my Darim, like the things that I pledged in the Chevron to Hashem. Ki nadar avdecha b'shivti b'kshur ba'aram le'mor in yashov yeshivena Hashem Yerushalayim v'yavarati et Hashem. As I made this neder that if Hashem returns me to Yerushalayim, that I will serve God. Vayomer lo hamelech lech b'shalom. And so he says, fine, go off. You can go to Hebron. וישלח אבשלום ברגלים בכל שבטי ישראל לאמור, תשלחם את כל השופר, ואמרתם מלך אבשלום בחברון. So he sends out spies to all the different tribes of Israel. He says, when you hear the sound of the shofar, then you'll say that Avshalom becomes king in Hebron. And you'll recall, David is first king in Hebron. Now David sits in Yerushalayim. But originally he was king in Hebron before he was king in Yerushalayim. V'yat Avshalom alchu 200 ish, so 200 people, 200 men went with Avshalom from Yerushalayim. Right, so they were called with him, but they're going innocently. They don't know this plan. ושחר שלום עד אחיתופל הגילוני יועץ דוד, מעירו מגילו בזרחו תזבחים, ויהי הקשר אמיץ, והעם הולך ורב את אבשלום. So Avshalom sends for Achitophel, who was David's counsel. And the conspiracy was strong for the people with Avshalom, increased continually. Anyway, things were looking good for Avshalom. So somebody comes and tells David what's going on. In other words, Avshalom has, first of all, built himself up as being in place of the king. David isn't really aware, and then he asks, leave to go to Hebron. In the meantime, he has a conspiracy that at the right moment he's going to renounce himself as being the king. David realizes that he's now in a very weak position. He says, we all have to get up and run away because we will not have any escape from Avshalom. So somehow lately, now David understands really what's going on. He says, basically, we've got to leave. We have to run away. Right, so all these servants say, right, whatever you say is what we'll do. So the king and all of his household go out on foot, and they leave the king. The king leaves behind 10 of his concubines to watch over the house, presumably assuming that Avshalom would slaughter them. So they all go off. So they go out, and he has all these people with him. So one of the people who goes with him is Itai Hagiti, who's from Gat. In other words, so he's not of Bnei Israel. He says, you should go back. T'mol bo'echa, v'hayom aniyecha imanu, v'lechet v'ani holech v'asher ani holech, shuv Hashem v'techecha imach chesed v'emet. Anyway, he tries to get him to go back, and Itai says to the king, Chai Hashem v'chei Adoni HaMelech, ki b'kom asher yasham Adoni HaMelech, im b'mavet im b'chayim ki sham ya'avdecha. So he says, he pledges his loyalty to the king. ויאמר דוד על איתי לך ועבור ויעבור איתי הגיתי וכל אנשיו וחלטיו אשר איתו. וכל הארץ בוכים קול גדול וכל העם עוברים והמלך עובר בנחל קדרון וכל העם עוברים על פני הדרך את המדבר. Okay, so everybody is crying, right? They're in a terrible state, running away from Avshalom under threat of death, right? Because they're assuming that Avshalom has gathered all of his strength, and he's going to effect a coup. V'hinei gam Tzadok, right? Tzadok, who is the priest, v'chol haLevim, and all the Levim were with him, v'sim et Aron brit ha'Elokim, v'yetziku et Aron ha'Elokim, v'yal Evyatar, atom kol ha'am ba'avur min ha'ir. So here we see, right, Tzadok and all of the Levites with him bearing the Ark of the Covenant, and they set down the Ark of God, and Aviatar went up until all the people had finished passing out of the city. So they leave the city with the Aron, and Aviatar, this is where we know that Aviatar went with David into the Midbar. So he tells
So
him,
I'm sorry, if I recall, Eviatar had already gone into the wilderness with David during the war with Shaul, after Shaul killed all the priests.
yes, right. But now we see that he's still with David, and here we see, even though I don't know it says explicitly there before, but here we see that he was among the Nosei Aron Hashem, right? That he carried the Aron of God.
Right, and then he did. Then he did not.
What do you mean then he did not? You mean?
Or rather, there's no indication that the Aron was even with David then.
I didn't hear you. There's no indication.
During the war with Shaul, there's no indication that the Aron was with David.
I don't think so. I think during that time the Aron was.
Actually, I don't know where it was.
I can't remember now the whole. I don't think it was in Shiloh anymore. I think it might have been in Givon. Lee Nether, I'll look that up for you. In any event, but we know that now the Aron was in Yerushalayim, right? Because David had formally brought the Aron to Yerushalayim. That was supposed to be its final resting place, and Tzadok and Eviatar presumably taking it with them as a kind of safeguard for the people. And David says, no, you should take it back. And if God wants, he'll bring me back. And, then we'll be with the Aron. If Hashem says, I don't want you, right? He'll do what is good for in his eyes. So now the king says to Tzadok the Kohen, Shuva ha'ir b'shalom, v'achimatz mincha v'Yonatan ben Aviatar shnei b'neichem itchem. So he says, do you see, return to the city in peace, and your two sons with you, Achimatz and your son Yonatan, the son of Eviatar. He's saying, Bichlal, not just to take the Aron back, but you as Kohanim, you should return. And then you'll see that I will tarry in Arvot Midbar until I hear word from you, essentially. Yashev Tzadok v'Aviatar Aron Halakim Yerushalayim v'Yeshvu Sham. So they listen to David, so they understand that they'll go back, they will keep the Aron in Yerushalayim, but they can also serve as spies. So their presence in Yerushalayim will not necessarily arouse suspicion to Avshalom, because after all, they're Kohanim and they're supposed to be doing their service.
However, in the war with Shaul, that did not give them any protection.
Right, but that exactly right there. But there didn't give David any protection or the Kohanim, but because of the essentially because of the madness of Shaul. Avshalom we see as a rational player. We don't think that he's going to kill anybody out of some unwarranted paranoia, but rather he's trying to take power. It'll seem natural to him that the Kohanim will still be in Yerushalayim. Remember right now Avshalom is outside of Yerushalayim. He's in Hebron or on his way to Hebron, and are already in Hebron, and so he doesn't know that Tzadok and Eviatar helped with David's escape. So David understands, it'll be better if they stay there and they can observe what's happening and they won't arouse suspicion. That's how I understand it. But David has a team. So in the meantime, now David is continuing on his way. He goes up Ma'aleh has a team, that is the incline up to Har Hazetim. He's going and he's crying. V'rosh lo chafui. His head is covered.
Uncovered.
Well, there are different understandings of this, actually. They say he had his head covered. Eva v'chafui rosh. I think we see it, also in the in the Megillah. I think I said uncovered before. I got done. But chafui, it's something you see from the use in Megillat Esther. It would be the way somebody in mourning would present themselves. So chafui rosh would mean, like the chapot means to cover. That's really what it really is. V'hu holech yachef, and David is going barefoot. V'chol ha'am asher ito chafu ish rosho v'alu alo uvacho. Right. So all the other people who are going with him are covering their heads and they're going up and they're crying. So now, we've given it a great, a little more context. So now we understand Yachef. What does it mean that David went Yachef? Now we already know from earlier, in the Psukim earlier, it says when they left the city, they left on foot. It says that explicitly, they left on foot. So what does Yachef mean? Here, Rashi says, Chafui mechurach. In other words, bound up, like their heads are bound up, kederach ha'aveni, the way that mourners bind their heads. So the simple understanding then, again, of Yachef would be that they're going barefoot. But the Gemara argues, no, maybe Yachef here doesn't, because it says specifically about David. It starts off by saying, David oleh b'maleh zetim oleh b'chet v'rosho chafui v'hu holech Yachef. Why doesn't it say about everybody that they're all holech Yachef? What's special about David? So the pushback in the Gemara is that maybe it doesn't mean that he literally went barefoot. Maybe it meant that, like we understood before, he's on foot, and Yachef in this context only applies to David because he is now without his royal horse and whip. So he's going like every other person. So for him, that's Yachef. So the Gemara, the point is the Gemara here doesn't prove Nilata Sandal, because maybe that's what Yachef means in this context. I'm going to stop here because I'm very tired and I know that Michael Schwartz is not feeling well. So we'll continue this next time. You're all invited to, if you want to go ahead and look ahead in the Gemara. So we're here, I think this is Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. Or Ayin, wait a second. Ayin Zayin, I think it's Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph is where we're at. Yeah, Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. So you can look ahead for the next, the next few lines, and you'll see how the Gemara finally gets to Nilata Sandal. And I think that's it for today. And so we'll meet next week. And in the meantime, have a happy Yom Yerushalayim. And take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.